Welcome to GovExperts Insights, where we talk about politics, policy, and the practice of both. I'm your host, Chris Britton. Today, we're digging into the world of financial strategy, investing, and entrepreneurship, with a healthy dose of economic and public policy discussion along the way. Our guest is Larry Berlin, a University of Chicago double alum, founder of Blue Point Advisory Services, angel investor, startup mentor, and the former CFO of Freedom Fries, a pioneering platform in the search and news space. For the last 9 years, Larry has also been part of the New Venture Challenge at the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago, one of the oldest and top-rated business school incubators in the nation. He's helped attract over $1.7 billion in investment and generate nearly $10 billion in returns with companies like Simple Mills, Venmo, Braintree, and Grubhub. Larry's career has spanned private equity, corporate finance, fintech, board governance. He brings not only decades of experience, but also an unusually practical lens on what works and what policymakers often get wrong. Larry, welcome to GovExperts Insights.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here, to be with you, and to be with your listeners, and to help discuss and hopefully cast a little bit of light on my views on important issues of today.
We're excited about hearing from you. Now, you've worked across banking, trading, tech, and startups. Looking back, which role shaped your worldview the most?
I would say probably trading is a beginning point, because you're standing there on your own in a pit that used to exist in our world, and you're screaming and you're yelling, and it's up to you whether you're the best, the fastest, whether you've hit the right product, which is basically buying the right option or selling the right call, and reacting and learning how to get along with other people, and learning how to admit when you're wrong and changing gear really fast. I think that was a great start to a career that has then moved into business, where those skills continuously apply and where you continue to learn how to analyze and how to think and how to say, oh, wow, I'm right, let's run with it, or, oh, I'm wrong, let's change that and go somewhere else.
So the interpersonal skills actually helped you to be able to apply the practical and everything that you've learned.
It's funny to say that the personal skills you learn on the floor of an exchange would help you with that, because it seems totally idiosyncratic. However, yes, it does, because you learn how to get along with a wide variety of people with a wide variety of ideas, and they all come together in one marketplace. In our case, the S&P 100 index, we had 300 people in a pit, and we all came together to create a market based upon the information we had, and take that market and make a profit for ourselves or our employers or our customers. And that's what we're doing in business.
Well, it's interesting too, because as you said that too, that's also what we're trying to do as a democracy, a republic, and as a country. I think so. If you could do it there within a market, maybe we can do it, as a country.
That's what Milton Friedman would say. And last week, I'm on the board of Free to Choose Network, which is part devoted to Milton Friedman. And one of the things we talked about, and with Leo Melamed, who founded part of the Mercantile Exchange here in Chicago, is how we come together and how we form a market, how important that is towards the world basically trading and getting wealthier. And with getting wealthier, we get healthier, wiser, and everything else, we hope.
An interesting way to look at it. Now, were there moments in your early career, maybe at DocuLabs or UBS or on the exchange floor, where you saw firsthand how government policy or regulation helped shape a market or a company?
Well, it's funny, I'll go to the market first once again and go back to the floor of the exchange. I stood to the crash of 1987 and watched the market decline rapidly. And while there have been many studies as to what caused that crash, one of the major studies done with Norton Miller, who won a Nobel Prize in Chicago, shows that government regulation was a precipitate cause of that crash. Dan Rostenkowski proposed changes in the deductibility of interest expense. And in so doing, would mean less likelihood of a merger and acquisition. That meant that companies that were valued highly because of potential merger didn't deserve that value. Market crashed. As soon as he withdrew that proposal, market went up. Some years later, and again with the markets and generally, um, in 2007, 2008, much government policy, and you can read the Wall Street Journal editorials from before that happened, was to promote housing and to promote general ownership of housing. I think that's a wonderful cause. I think it's a great thing to do. But the way they went about it overvalued high risk and undervalued low risk. And the net result was we had a crash in 2008.
Very interesting. So do you think we're kind of destined to repeat that every few years?
Unfortunately, this saying, learn history so you don't repeat it, and sort of those words, we don't follow it. So yeah, we're doomed to try it again. I have no
I
idea
think I
how.
think the, I think the better lesson on that is not. I've heard that quote. I said I think we learn history so that we know when we repeat it.
Yeah. And maybe when we know not what not to do when we repeat it, but we don't show any real sign of that either. I mean, some of the lessons that there's a new book out by Phil Graham that came out last week, and one of his chapters is talking about what we did wrong in the 1930s that helped exacerbate the depression of that time. And guaranteed we have not learned those lessons and that we would probably repeat them if we are confronted with a macroeconomic situation like that again.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Now, when you're coming from the University of Chicago, did that environment either intellectually or politically influence how you think about markets and government today?
Actually, I'll answer that in a couple ways. First, the single most important letter I've ever received in my life sits in the other room, and that's my admissions letter to the University of Chicago. It has affected the way I think. It's affected the way I analyze. It's affected my friendships, my connections. The fact that I can go to a baseball game is because of that university. The fact that I'm here is because of that university. It taught me to analyze, bottom line. It taught me to look broadly at topics. It taught me then how to apply it. Because we can all play Hamlet and argue to be or not to be, but you have to learn how to act also. And one of the things for the University of Chicago was, yes, let's analyze, let's act. And a good president in specific knows that when he takes an action, conditions can change. He learns to think about that, not worry about admitting fault and moving on to what he's now learned, or soon she has now learned.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I feel the same about my alma mater. Things are so much in my life today that would not be what it is if I hadn't had the fortunate circumstances to go to Texas A&M things. But
Wonderful place.
yeah, now at Blue Point, I want to talk a little bit about startups, scale, and strategy. At Blue Point, you're working with early stage companies, navigating everything from capital strategy to compliance. What are the top three pain points that you're seeing right now?
The first one I pick on, I just got off a phone call with a company that's doing government contracting. And the first thing I'd point to them is compliance. There are so many rules between a locality, a state, and the federal government that you have to comply with. Some of them are quite obvious. Don't be mean. Don't discriminate, things like that. But then the hows, wheres, and whys of each one are not there. In Illinois, all of our companies have to meet a sexual harassment prevention training clause. People forget the word prevention when they're talking about it, and that's not a good thing, but it's funny. And you have to do it, and it's important. It's important to everybody working in your company. And it's a minor thing, and lawyers don't remember to tell you that. Us teachers don't remember to tell you that. Others don't remember. And then all of a sudden you're out of compliance. But then every time you're dealing with labor and relations, employees, hiring, firing, there's all kinds of rules. And complying with them is very important. And making it work is very important. Then I would say that if you go from there, there's just a million different issues with government and where they come in and things that you have to learn to make it all work. And if the two other pain points, actually, to go back to your question, One is companies, especially from my background, ignore marketing. They forget that that product has to fit the market, and they get all in love with how that product works for them, and they forget that they're somewhat unique. And they're one of the few, say, University of Chicago or Texas A&M graduates, and it may not work for a University of Illinois or a Harvard graduate, or for somebody who doesn't have a university degree. And you have to sit there and you have to do the marketing, and you have to do the marketing study. And there's so much information available thanks to the internet and thanks to better analytics. And then you go back and you ask questions, you ask your friends, you ask your family, would you buy this? If it's a dog product, would your dog eat it? Does your dog hate it? If 20 of your friends out of 30 say their dogs won't go near that biscuit, you're not going to sell it.
Right.
You have to go out, and people forget. They think, oh, yeah, this is the best idea. Everyone will need it. And they can be like Betamax, for those who know what Betamax was.
Yeah, you're gonna have to explain that the Betamax versus VHS.
Yeah, Betamax, and we have to explain VHS, actually. And a day before streaming and before DVD, we put a big tape into this big clunky machine that tied to our TVs to watch a movie or to record. We put it into our cameras and then record what we wanted. There were two competitors, Sony Betamax and VHS. VHS, they probably don't know, it's a cassette tape. Betamax, I don't even know what it looked like. It was a better product. It worked better. It was more efficient. It lost. They missed the market. And you see this happen all the time with companies. I would sidetrack to one other example, actually, Sears Roebuck. For those who are old enough to know it, Sears had a catalog. For those who aren't old enough, every quarter it came in the mail. It was about this thick. The Christmas catalog had every toy a kid would want. I bought all my Lego from that catalog, and my Hot Wheels and my bicycle, and my mom bought my jeans and, my socks from that catalog. They were Amazon. They had the last mile delivery. They had the stores. They had the warranties. They had the fix. They had everything Amazon had. Yet here we are. Has anyone talked about Sears Roebuck since about 1990? It was one of the top 10 companies on the Fortune 500 list in the 70s. They missed. They forgot marketing. They forgot technology. And you hear stories like that all the time. I mean, Kodak had digital cameras before then. Who's ever heard of Kodak today? Who's ever heard of Polaroid? They also had it. They go on and on where people miss. And it's the marketing, and it's not asking themselves a question. And so I would say, to finish up on this one, the other major headache are ourselves. We don't necessarily sit and consider everything around us, and then instead of playing Hamlet, go to an action, but then reconsider that action when new evidence becomes available. And our learning constantly and learning from the people around us and our coworkers, they're not employees, but they're coworkers, is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when a founder comes to you and they're panicked, and particularly in today's environment about rising costs, inflation, tariffs, tax exposure, I mean, where do you start with advising them on how to proceed?
I wrote down, I start with a good Bordeaux and a glass of wine.
Alcohol can help.
Alcohol can help. Beer, the cause of and solution to all man's problems.
Yeah.
Homer J. Simpson said that. He's a great philosopher. um, you begin with actually the company, and you begin with what are you doing and what's going on around you. There's some things we can't predict, and it's actually the uncertainty that matters more than the actual event. Taxes, and I've been saying this lately, taxes could be 20 or 25 or 30 or 40%. Fine. I can cope with it as long as I know it's consistent. And then I have to redo my financial models with each one of the facts. If I have inflation, my financial model includes inflation. If I have higher taxes, then guess what? My pre-tax incomes can be taxed higher, so I'm going to have lower cash flow to my investors. That's going to make some investments unworkable. And not just investment in a new company, but if you're building a new plant or a new data center or a new piece of software, you have to do that same analysis all the time. And it affects that analysis dramatically. And we'll get to this, I'm sure. Governments don't understand that. And they'll make things that'll be all over the map all the time. And then you don't know how to adjust. And then you do your best if you can.
Well, and that's an interesting point in terms of government understanding of what's going on in the private sector. Is there a better way for the private sector to communicate with government and for government to understand what's going on in the private sector?
You I'm sure there is a better way because we're failing at it in a lot of cases. And it's nonpartisan. In the US, both parties will make these mistakes. Um, the nice thing and the simple answer is, well, every person serving in government should have to take micro, not macroeconomics, as they come in and give them a 1 week module on how microeconomics works and how the basic laws of economics always apply. That would be the easy way. The next way is you have to sit down. And I've sat down with the Congress people who I totally disagree with and have a lot of respect for, even though they're very far off from my view, because they tried to understand, in this case, the credit card industry and the dynamics of it and where fees go and where they come from and who's at risk before they regulated it. The regulations they proposed, I didn't agree with, but I was confident they understood it and it was somewhat more moderate than they otherwise would have proposed. So the one line answer is we have to communicate. We have to sit down in their offices, be respectful, and talk with them and listen to them.
Yeah, because so often you see both sides kind of stand off, and they view a communication as complicity with one another. Things, whether it's in a policy that they disagree with or a regulation that may be about to impose upon them, and absent a broader understanding, where we've got a joint public policy obligation to get to, and you've got to communicate on that. You're going to get bad outcomes if you're not talking.
Very much, and I said this to one of our former speakers not too many years ago. I was walking around the northwest side of the city of Chicago, and it was a Sunday afternoon. The Cubs were on the radio or the TV, and people were sitting on their front porches. I felt like it was the 1950s, reading the Sunday paper, drinking lemonade with the Cubs on their little television screens on their phones. It's no bigger than what we had. And their concerns are the same. What do they want? If you said, what's the top 5 things you want? Good health, good schools, good government. They're the same. How we get there is different. And the same thing with business. And it was a matter of those have to be communicated, and the details are very tough. People go to war over those details. But physically, hopefully not literally, but it can happen. But the people have to sit down and they have to listen because they may not be that far apart. The other thing which I would add is that going out on TV or within a business, the equivalent of a television, and saying so-and-so is wrong doesn't win. If my board came to me and said, yeah, you're wrong, I'm going to get defensive. I'm going to defend the wrong decision. My board might be right. If my board comes to me in public and puts it into the Chicago paper or the Wall Street Journal, I'm going to be very defensive. If they walk into my office and say, hey, let's talk about it, I care, I listen. So it goes back to what I said to begin with, HR really matters.
Well, that's why in the media, and in particular social media, where we just kind of put a top of mind reaction out there and see what how much traction that picks up or things. Probably not the best way to start a negotiation or a communication.
We can watch both parties in Washington the last 10 or 12 or 14 years and see that's true, let alone, again, businesses.
Yeah.
And how many times does something get into the public, whether it's a merger? And actually, I would take an example. This public, Albertsons and Kroger, who were going to merge. That battle got fought out in public. Both sides have probably lost because they probably needed to merge. Another one where both sides will win right now is Nippon Steel with U.S. Steel,
Mm-hmm.
where it made so much sense for Nippon to buy U.S. Steel. And when it was being fought out in the papers in November, December of last year, Nippon lost. The U.S. steel workers lost. The U.S. steel customers lost. Shockingly, President Trump took that quietly, because quiet's not his forte. And he came up with a deal that was acceptable to enough people in America where Nippons can invest billions of dollars in improving steel. And that's close to my house in Gary, Indiana. Fortunately, beyond smelling range, but close. And that's how you do it quietly.
Yeah, that is amazing. Now, and it's interesting you bring up like, kind of the international tariffs. I did want to talk from your experience. How do interest rates, abrupt tariff or tax policy changes, how do they affect a founder's decision making?
It has a broad effect on the decision whether to go in or not go in to begin with. I'm creating an income statement as an investor. In that income statement, I'm literally taking my revenue and I'm taking my cost of goods sold, I'm taking my operating expenses, I'm getting to a pre-tax income line. I'm taking that pre-tax income line and I'm taxing it. And then I'm adding back non-cash expenses to get cash flow. I'm looking at my cost to go into the project and how much I'm going to get out of the project over time. You raise interest rates, you raise volatility, you have inflation, those numbers are affected. Things that I might have invested in, I won't invest in anymore. I might be safer in government bonds than I am in that project. And my prospect of probable profit isn't great enough because of inflation, because of taxes, because of other costs like regulatory.
So
So I
it
just
seems like
never do
that
the
directly
project.
affects like innovation.
It directly affects innovation because you're trying, you see this daily. I see it this week where companies, I talked with a young lady last week in pharmaceutical. Getting money, she said, is as hard as it's ever been because the uncertainty in our environment now, with everything going on in this world, is so great that people are standing back and saying, wait a second. When I look at something, Chris, at a value, I have to, I have to discount it to present value. Very simply, $1 a year from now is not worth as much as $1 today. I have to figure out whether that dollar a year from now is worth 90 cents or 95 cents in today's money. That's the discounted present value of $1 in the future. I do that with every investment. Risk is part of that assessment. And if I have huge risk, whether it's political or economic or inflationary or anything else, that discount rate goes up. That dollar becomes worth less. I'm going to invest less.
Now, have you encountered companies who have either relocated or restructured to avoid bad public policy environments?
I live in the state of Illinois, so yes. It's not just the taxes. Our taxes are not as high as California or New York, but it's a bad public policy environment. There are too many rules, too many regulations. They're constantly changing. Labor laws are our first place to pick on. It's not so much the minimum wage, so that obviously has a huge effect if you're opening up a bar, restaurant, fast food, anything, depending upon a minimum wage-based salary. But the hiring laws, the firing laws, especially the firing laws. How do I get rid of an employee? If this employee is serving hamburgers in my grill, do I have to document for 3 months what he or she did wrong before I can fire him? Well, guess what? I can't run a grill that way. So they have a huge effect. And the net effect is that you go to a place like Florida or Tennessee or Texas or one of the other great states in this union, and you avoid Illinois.
So our federal structure and and having a laboratory of the states, somewhat inoculates our economy of picking a blue direction or a red direction and doubling down and things. But would you see that as a strength?
Yeah, and I like the quote from Robert La Follette there, the great state of Wisconsin. We're a laboratory of democracy. Um, it's a great strength. It's gives us a choice and places to go beyond your market. And there are cases where it could be the opposite, where you're better off in California or in Texas, and you can look at the regulatory environment and how that affects your business, the tax environment, and how it affects not just your business but your competitors' businesses. And in so doing, you pick it. And then the best ideas, in theory, percolate up to the federal level. And again, that's in theory. And but there are times when the federal government will take something from the state of Wisconsin. Or I'll give you a bad example, but it was a try, was Obamacare, which comes out of Massachusetts. And they had a lot of effort, and Massachusetts tried a lot of things. And Heritage Foundation was responsible for a lot of what was done in Massachusetts. It worked there. We could debate about whether it works for the federal government, but it came out of a laboratory to try. And if it had been done right and they learned the lessons from Massachusetts, it would work. If they did it wrong and didn't learn those lessons, then some future president will have to reform it.
Yeah. Yeah. An excellent example. Thanks. Now, I want to talk to you about angel investing boards and kind of policy choke points. I know you've been involved with multiple startups as both an investor and a board member. What policy decisions at the federal or state level do you see as among the biggest barriers to entrepreneurship?
You know, you could go with the obvious ones. Taxes are the obvious one. Labor, which I just referred to, is another obvious one. And they have a big barrier. Simple things like zoning, which is local, has a big influence. Um, Pollution controls, God knows we need them, but they can have a big effect. And there are times when we go too far and we're protecting nobody but demanding lots of money. The other thing is that policy changes quite often favor the existing companies. A, because they can afford to lobby for changes in their favor. That goes back to Milton Friedman again and George Stigler in the early 60s. They did that research. But it's important. I, as a company with $10 million in my bank account, can't afford to go meet 1,000 pages of government regulation. A company with $1 billion in their bank account, no big deal. So it can hinder growth of small business and competition and create monopoly situations just by passing what we sound think is a simple rule. But the burden of proof lays on the small company, which they can't do. They can't show
One
it.
of the things that we find in our public affairs business is that a lot of times small business, medium sized business are absolutely oblivious and unaware of both existing regulations that impact what they're doing, as well as proposed changes to that. Whereas they may be driven by larger competitors, they may be driven by competitive industries and things seeking to minimize them, but you know they're out trying to meet their customer demands, and this whole discussion is going on in a policy environment that they're unaware of and not a part of.
But that goes back to your last question, actually. There's two things which a company should do. One is a good board. If you have a good board, it's 5 or 7 members, and they're paying attention to your business, then they will alert you to what's coming through, what's about to be passed, or what exists that you're not in compliance with. The other thing, and I'm not generally a lawyer advertising mechanism, but a good lawyer
Sure. Sure.
will tell you, and my lawyers are very careful. They keep an eye on things in the businesses, and they'll call me up, and they're not charging me $800 an hour to call me up and say, "Hey, Larry, did you notice this?"
Lawyers are cheaper on the front end.
They're always cheaper on the front end than the back end, kind of like a drug dealer. But even then, I've had good long-term relationships, and a lot of it could be just friends who I've never used, but I mentioned something at a conversation somewhere, and they happen to hear again at another conversation about the exact same issue, and they'll call up and say, "Hey, Larry, go talk to Jill. She has heard stuff you don't know." We see that in business. I see that outside of business all the time. So
When you're looking at for a board, that's a great thing as a lawyer. And you mentioned the board. If you're looking at kind of board candidates, you want somebody that's politically aware of what's going on both in your state environment as well as your federal environment to be able to bring in that perspective and early warning system.
I would say aware. Political is one aspect of it. Economic and competition wise would be another. Um, and then simple issues that deal with business. Someone, if I have 7 people on my board, someone who's, they could be reading the newspapers and listening to television or the internet. They're important if they picking up news, things that matter. But someone who's telling me and there's a nice recommendation, which I'll give you in a second. What my competitors are doing or what the new product is important. Someone who's telling me about the mergers and acquisitions and related companies is important. And this comes from one of my lawyers. We tell the companies that we work with every quarter, sit down, spend an hour, have that glass of Bordeaux or that wine or a Portuguese wine, and talk about two things. What is your competition doing? And what's your exit strategy? That way, you know, A, what's in the market, but B, on the exit strategy. For an example, in a business, you could be trading at multiples of revenue forever. All of a sudden, that flips over to trading at multiples of EBITDA. Your whole business, if you plan to ever exit, has got to conform to now dealing with EBITDA growth and not just revenue growth. And so having people who are alert and having board members who are alert and paying attention to the world around them, and then being able to ask them at the board meeting. It's a waste of time to go over the numbers for the last quarter at a board meeting because I've got some brains there. The best expenditure of time is having my board members tell me what they're seeing in the world around and how that affects my business and my growth plans.
That's a great perspective, and kind of transition a little bit. I think keeping up with the changing economic and political winds today is more than a full-time job for many of us. But if you think about like tariffs and trade wars, are they showing up in your boardrooms, especially with companies that are relying on like global supply chains?
The answer is yes and no. A lot of the companies are small and dealing in local, but I had one, for example, in the wine sector. And the proposed tariffs on French wine in specific will have an effect and will make importing wine from France cost prohibitive.
So there's this theme going through our conversation. Just about every time we come back to it, it comes back to red wine or or alcohol.
I rarely drink, as my friends will say. They don't see me with a beer or alcohol in my hand, and I do like wine a lot. If you could see below the poster behind me, there's bottles of wine.
Yeah.
However, they've been here for many years, but it's a wonderful theme. It's a wonderful part of France, Portugal, Spain, and all the other great countries, and California.
So, recognizing that tariff aspect of that, and as that got socialized, did you see people engage and communicate that impact to government about the impact, and did that kind of inform any policy?
We'll see whether it's informed policy. I would say it has to start at the top of that. Yes, because you see it. My friends who are in building, my friends who are in real estate where they're going to build a house. My friends who are in sectors that deal with electronic vehicles, even. The materials that go into it are being affected by tariffs. My friends who are building, actually, one of my students was trying to make Indian style apparel from people in the US who come from the nation of India. Those materials are going to come from India. That affects their pricing dramatically. And can they sell the sari at a higher price and still get customers? So yes, it has effect up and down the ladder from, the cantaloupe in my refrigerator on up, and how people carry it. My Jewel may not carry cantaloupe, but they can't make a profit. Jewel's the food store here in Chicago. Um, so it does have an effect. Yes, they have all told their representatives, their newspapers, whatever, about the effect. And I think some of the president's reactions to it could be seen. He has stepped back at times. China in specific, I mean, as we had the conversations last week with them, too many products come from China, and you can threaten them and you could raise tariffs, but the average person in the street or the average business owner, it matters. And if it matters to a business owner, it means that he or she can't hire as many people. If they can't hire as many people, it trickles, horrible phrase, but it trickles down through the economy. And we have problems.
Yeah. So as you think about like overall American economic policy, what we, have been accustomed to, what we're changing to and transitioning to, do you think it encourages risk taking and innovation? And if not, what's missing things, and then, and are we moving to an economic system that is more innovative?
You know, the US has an ethos of innovation. I don't think policy can change it per se. And I give you an example. My friends from the UK will say, if there's a problem and I brought it up in the United States, within 10 days, I will have 10 different solutions on my desk. If I bring this up in the United Kingdom, I will have one solution and 10 documents explaining why it won't work. The US has that ethos. We always look at new things. We always see a problem from a friend of mine who hated her screen windows and decided to create roller furling screens. Say, wrap and unwrap so she can look out her window or prevent bugs, whatever she preferred. It's her issue. She had a problem, actually, same woman, with shoes. Her women wear pumps, their toes go down to the front of the shoe. It hurts because they're bumping up here. She created a little piece that you put at the ball of your feet, and it's sold all over America now, to keep a woman's feet from sliding down. It's that kind of ethos that no matter what government does, it characterizes our country and makes it impossible for government to stop innovation. It is possible for government to slow innovation, especially where research dollars are involved. One of the great things the government had done under Trump's first tax act was expensing capital expenditures as incurred rather than amortizing them over 10 years. That had a huge tax effect. It had a huge effect on the discounted present value of a deal or of a project. That could encourage it. Other things like that can encourage innovation. Not having it can discourage innovation, but I'd rather think with the glass half full side for the moment.
Well, that's a very American point of view on it. Like,
Yeah.
uh, you know, one regulatory issue that you wish lawmakers understood better from an entrepreneur's perspective.
You could go to tax. I think the one issue I wish they understood better is how we consider an investment. And we alluded to that earlier, but the fact that they don't know what I'm looking at, and they think the dollars grow on trees and that I'm always going to invest no matter what they do, doesn't work. They need to understand, again, that I'm looking at an income statement and I'm starting at revenue and I'm looking at my cost of goods sold and how much I have to invest to get there. And then my operating expenses and then my tax line to see how much cash I have. And then I'm looking to see what my alternatives are. It could be that I'm better off risk adjusted in bonds. I wish government people would understand that income statement analysis and then apply it when they look at tax or regulatory or other policy. I think it's the one thing I said I would make them take microeconomics,
That an
and I'll
investment
make
is a
that one of the
choice.
days. Yeah.
And an investment is a choice.
Investment's a choice. We're free to choose, as Milton Friedman once said. And I want them for the United States or for any country in the world, be the Soviet Russia or China. China's proven this. Making the choice where you help people invest helps improve the health, wealth, and wisdom of your nation. That's our goal.
Absolutely. So now, as we talk about economic trends and the role of government, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but
Yeah.
red states and blue states, how do entrepreneurs adapt in each of those political environments?
Actually, the simple way, they move. Illinois is losing, I think, what, 50,000 people a year right now? And
Yeah.
California is losing more than that. I'm not counting immigration coming in from
Well,
overseas.
and isn't it fascinating too? Because it has to the extent that you are losing population, that political power that goes with that population is transitioning to other states that, have a different point of view.
Except the people who are moving, like in California, it's not the blue voters who are moving to Arizona or Nevada. It's the red voters who are moving to Arizona or Nevada. And those states will, pick up congressional seats and electoral votes. And then they will apportion them in such a way that the red voters who are moving in are going to get their say so. So there's a lot of speculation that as we move into the 30s, I hate to think we're even close to that, but that you could see a change it could make an environment where the Democrats have a hard time taking over either House of Congress or the White House because of those population shifts. Now, that's ceteris paribus on everything else, all things equal. And they're never equal, as has been shown by the movement of, say, Hispanic votes over to the Democratic Republican Party. I hate the term Hispanic vote because someone from Puerto Rico or somebody from, well, Spain would count as a Hispanic vote, and someone from Chile, they don't have a lot in common. They even have different languages to a degree. Just like I can't understand someone from Newfoundland, they can't understand someone from Brazil if you're from Portugal. But that vote's moving, and to assume that it's going to always be constant was behind what I just said isn't true.
Yeah. Yeah. The Hispanic vote is not monolithic.
The Jewish vote, which is my ethnic category, is not monolithic. As I always say, you put 10 Jews at a dinner table and get 20 opinions. It's how every culture is.
Yeah. It is fascinating. And, I have seen over the last 20, 30 years, so many obituaries written on the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and neither of which have really turned out to be, true. So will be interesting to see how the next few years unfold.
Because I think out of the mistakes, and every party makes a mistake in government, economic and political and other, out of those mistakes, the new leadership in the other party arises before the new leadership in your own party.
Absolutely.
And hence you move, and we do, from Democrat to Republican. And as dismal as things are for the Democrats right now, it might be a year, it might be 3 years, it might be 10 years, but they'll be back because they'll come up with ideas that Americans want to listen to. And I would flip that back to business, by the way, Chris, and say they will come up with ideas that will help growth in the economy. Though we may
Yeah,
not agree with
absolutely.
it first, but they all will figure it out at some point.
Well, that kind of leads me to the next question about how do you evaluate the macroeconomic environment when you're deciding whether to invest or advise a company?
Very carefully, actually, and it depends on where your investment is. The first thing we look at is what are your odds of higher regulation affecting you or entrenching a power that is. Um, they the inflationary economy. What's this do? Can I count on my inputs to be the same price, or am I going to have to inflate them 10% a year because the cost of, say, AI labor and programmers is going up to 10% a year? Can I deal with it? But you go into those issues very rapidly. You go into the chance of a recession and what's recession proof or recession beatable over time. Young company, quite often, they're growing fast enough. So if you have a recession, you'll be fine. Other times, the exact opposite is true. And if I'm selling, whatever, I pick a product, new salt shakers, say there's a need for it. Actually, I'll give you a better one, mailboxes, physical mailboxes. I have a company that I helped advise that does that. As long as
I
people
need
have
one, so I need
houses,
that name of that company, by the way.
I will give that to you. And they're standalone mailboxes, and they're great. And you'll be able to put your favorite team. Actually, I can tell you, it's called Adorn, Adoorn. It's my advertising, and I'll charge them for it appropriately. You can have it stand. It comes with a post. You get the little concrete to put around it. You have to buy a little bit of sod to put over the concrete, etc. No one had innovated in that space in 20 years. They innovated. Their sales increased dramatically, direct to consumer. Now they have deals with a couple of the larger retailers. Their sales are increasing more. And again, going back, they came in, they found a niche. And they found a niche that was created by the world. And we look at what's going on with the economy. If people were to stop building houses, period, we may not find that this is worth doing. On the other hand, if people stop building houses and our market are people who already own houses, then we might find that this is even better to do.
Well, sure. And just to take a little bit of an aside, our need is we've got an older mailbox and things, but then I got to looking at it. I was like, wouldn't it be great if we had some place to receive deliveries and be able to have some security on that? And so I did a little bit of research, just very high level, veneer level, Larry. But you realize too that the Postal Service has regulations associated with your mailbox. and that they have to be approved. And so you've got a whole bunch of things there. So it's, to innovate, we come across a very good example of public policy impacting the private sector and vice versa.
Absolutely. That's actually a great example. Going back to one of your first questions, you have to meet the government standard. It has to fit exactly right. The mailman has to be able to access it, or mailwoman, the exact same way all the time. The key or whatever has to be usable.
Yep. Yep.
And here's where government has a big impact. You obviously, and flipping back on that question, the obvious one is obviously pharmaceutical and anything medical, where you have to have FDA approval and government's rules, regulations, and God knows there's a good reason for a lot of it, but there's bad reasons for others. And one of the nice things that government could do, I don't know if that's one of your questions, is work to reform and regularize those rules. And that's where the federal government comes in, where they do it rather than states. It's a lot easier to meet one set of rules than to have to meet 50 plus Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and wherever else.
Well, one of the things we see at the state level and then at the federal level is that states, are generally among the first to try to engage on a particular issue. Take, for example, artificial intelligence. Multiple state legislators out there are considering regulations and oversight related to artificial intelligence. And of course, you have also in this in the current Congress efforts to look at that, but also kind of preempt the states. So it's an interesting dynamic between the states and the federal government to try to have each state has a standard, and then to create a national standard, you've got to have preemption and things. But it's not something that happens overnight. But generally, that discussion is actually a fairly healthy one, I think.
Actually, I would use another example, and I'll go back to artificial intelligence, marijuana laws.
Sure, we've got that's front and center in Texas right now.
Yeah, it is. You guys vote on them, but it's important because if you're in the marijuana business and going into it, there's a few problems you face. But the two that are very insurmountable in a lot of ways is that your input, the marijuana you buy, you can't import it from another state. So if you're in California, you only can sell California-based marijuana. Now, in a federal system like we have, that's not quite the way the Constitution set it up. And by the way, I'm not for marijuana being legal or against it, one way or the other. I don't use it, so I kind of don't care in a lot of ways. In other ways, I do care. But the other thing is that you cannot take money. You can't use credit cards in federally chartered banks. MasterCard, Visa, Discover, American Express are unusable for marijuana. So here I have government regulation at the federal level, and I have state regulation saying it's free and open and legal, and the two are in such conflict that the industry cannot develop the way it probably should over time until the federal laws meet the state laws again. And who knows which way that'll go and when.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks. So I want to jump ahead to kind of our rapid fire kind of questions and just get one word or maybe a couple of sentences on each one of them, and just kind of get your reaction on a few topics, things before we close out here. But best policy for entrepreneurship: deregulation, tax credits, cheap capital, something else?
I'm tempted to say cheap capital, but I think deregulation. It allows for an open market and the movement of people to come into this market to compete most easily.
The most underappreciated economic indicator?
I look at the background indicators. You can see the unemployment rate or the amount of jobs created, but I want to know where those jobs were created. Under Biden's last 2 years, most of those jobs were created in either healthcare or in the government. In healthcare or in government, they are not jobs that are productive. They don't add to the value of GDP in the same way as they would in manufacturing or programming or services. That's probably the first thing I recommend looking at the background. The least, by the way, important one to me is trade balance. If someone wants to give me $1 for my good, if he wants to take my dollar for their goods and those goods are useful, Milton Friedman did say this, fine, I'll give him the piece of green.
You're getting a good deal.
I'm getting a great deal. I'll eat my chocolate and they can have a piece of paper.
That's right. Biggest regulatory headache for a startup?
Probably labor. and meeting all the labor laws.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. And one book every startup founder should read.
Okay, I'm gonna be funny. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
All right, I can see it.
um, I think you read, I'm Free to Choose would actually be way up there on that list by Milton Friedman. Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek would be two. But I tend to think that reading, we have so much available on the internet that you could sit there and read article after article on the internet, and to sit on a nice beach in Hawaii and read a book about how to build a business. Your spouse will kill you. Stick to Hitchhiker's Guide.
For sure. And last rapid fire, but one word that defines your leadership style.
I'd like to say collegiality, and I'll give you two more sentences, I hope. General Mattis, who I saw last week, was Secretary of Defense, and he said the most important thing you can have when running a country are allies. With an ally, you win a war. With an enemy, you lose a war. Without allies, you lose a war. This is true in business as well as defense policy, foreign policy, and every other policy we can think of. Your workers need to be with you, and it's not just paying them. It's having them share that vision and that spirit that helps you build a company, because you're all going to be working 12 and 14-hour days, and I don't care how much you pay them. They're missing their kid's baseball game for that. You can't pay enough for that. There better be a reason.
Excellent advice. So, Larry, this has been a incredible, wide-ranging, practical, candid conversation. I want to thank you for that. Before we go, I wanted to ask, what's one thing you want lawmakers, investors, and founders to keep in mind when creating or reacting to economic policy?
I'll go back to Milton Friedman. Actually, I wanted that. People know best what's for people. It's probably going back to Plato, but people know what's best. You know what's best for your business. You know what's best for your family. You know what's best for you. Of course, there's people who'll be influencing that decision for you, but that's important. It's important for government to remember that we all know what's best for ourselves and leave as many decisions to us, the people, as possible.
Absolutely. Larry, thank you again. We're going to link to Blue Point Advisory and your past work in our episode notes. For our viewers and listeners, if you like this conversation, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to GovExperts Insights and follow us on LinkedIn or wherever you get your podcast. This show is here to explore the real-world impact of policy and politics and how smart people like Larry Berlin are navigating it. So we thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you have enjoyed and find something of value. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I much appreciate it.
Thanks for joining this edition of GovExperts Insights. We invite you to follow this and other episodes at govexperts.com or on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and our other social media channels.